We come up with names. Sometimes we'll say people with hearing impairments, but then if you ask the deaf community, they say, no, I'm deaf. Don't call me a person with a hearing impairment because we're using people first language. They'll say, I'm deaf. So it's really interesting that what I really don't like about it is when people that aren't living with a disability, although we all have disabilities, but not living with maybe a disability that's served by our system or something like that. If
Yeah.
that's the case, I would listen to the people who are living it, not the people who aren't living it. Why are we coming up with titles? That's ridiculous.
Welcome to the Nick Speaks podcast, where we speak up, speak out, and speak loud for the disabled community. Tune in every Tuesday, and don't forget to subscribe. And now your host, Nicolas Comstock.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Nick Speaks podcast. I'm your host, Nicolas Comstock. This is the podcast where we speak up, speak out, and speak loud about the issues that matter to the disabled the most. I'm your host, Nick Comstock. But I said that already. But for those of you who forget things, I'm glad I said it. I'm so glad you're here with me today on this Tuesday because I have an amazing guest who's been in the field of disability for 44 years. Wow, that's so awesome. She is the director or the owner, or maybe both, of Dynamic Pathways. I worked with her on the Richland County Human Rights Committee for 40 years before I got too big for the small little town and moved to the big city. Please help me welcome my good friend, Jean Stuntz. Jean, how are you doing?
Thank you, Nick. What a nice introduction. I'm
Uh,
doing good. Thanks.
Good. I told you in our pre-call last week that you look like a retro version of my favorite judge, Judge Judy, and you certainly do today
I
with
told everybody that.
what they say.
They laughed at me. They said they can kind of see it.
Yeah, yeah. And so for those of you, especially if you're a big Judge Judy fan like I am, some people follow sports. I follow Judge Judy. Uh, for those of
I'm
you
not
who,
making any rulings today.
huh?
I'm not going to make any rulings today.
Yes, please, please. Yeah. Well, hey, it would be interesting and good ratings for our show. Go ahead. Uh, but for those of you who are a big Judge Judy fan, go look up pictures of when she first started out in television and you'll see what I'm talking about. So, Jean, we've tried to do this forever.
We have. I'm so sorry. My schedule's so crazy sometimes.
No, you're perfect. You're perfect. I I think you're so awesome. We started working together and I think 2015
I trust you.
is when we started. That's been 11 years ago.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Dang, we've known each other for a long time. So, why don't you tell everybody about you and a little bit about yourself, your family, if you want, and then I'll ask you some questions and we'll have some fun.
Sure. Well, my name's Jean Stuntz, and I'll start with my family. I love my family, so I'm happy to share. My husband is Wayne, and he just retired last year. He's a retired pastor, and so we've kind of moved around the Columbus area quite a bit while he was working as a pastor in different churches, and. And then I have 4 kids. 3 are biological, and my youngest is adopted from India. And big news, she got married about 2 months ago. The other kids are a little older. They're all married with kids, and so that was the last one. So big old check in our family. Um, I have 6 grandkids. They're all boys. Uh,
That's 6 boys.
all boys. Yep.
I grew up with 5 brothers, so
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, they each the other 3 kids each have had 2 boys apiece. So it's 2, 2, and 2, and she and her husband, my youngest and her husband, are talking about wanting quite a few kids. So I said, well, have a couple and see what that feels like. But so yeah, we'll see. More grandkids on the way, I think.
Yeah. Grandkids, they're so much fun. I've heard. I
Yep.
don't. I'm not a grandpa. Who knows if I'll become a grandpa? But um, I've heard they're so much fun because you can just fill them up with sugar and then send them home. So that's
I
what I've
think they get a little more screen time when they're at our house is what I think, but
heard.
I think
Yeah.
your parents are a little more limiting than we are.
Screen time and sugar. Well, it's because the screen time eliminates things like, broken legs
There
and
you go. Yeah.
broken bones. And yeah, totally get that. So you're proud of your kids. That's now you said your daughter that was adopted, she was from India. Did
Yes.
she go back to India for the wedding?
No, no, we held the wedding here, and she doesn't know her birth family. She was in an orphanage in India. So, but we did go back with her when she was senior in high school, and for her heritage trip back, and that was several years ago now because she's graduated from college and a master's degree and all the things, and she's working. So she's 27 now. But we did go back for her heritage trip, so she was able to experience the country and that kind of thing. So it was good.
Cool. I love that. That's awesome. So you're proud of your 4 kids. What else is about Jean Stuntz that you want people to know?
Well, I actually started in this industry or kind of was birthed this industry is
Yeah.
birthed into me, I think. Very early on, I actually had a babysitting job when I was 11
Mhm.
with a family who had 2 boys with muscular dystrophy and then a daughter. And so that really kind of resonated with me. I was their babysitter through high school, and then even after I went to college, I would come home on the summers, and I would work with them as well. As just became a part of their family, and so helped out with the boys, and that's kind of where the whole disability community kind of started with me.
That's awesome. Now, when you said you started this job at 11, right?
Well,
What
not this job, but I yeah, kind of like entry into the disability world, I guess. Yeah.
when you started at 11 because you went and you were looking, I think, did you say in your Catholic church or
Yeah, so I was teaching, Sunday school really in the church and helping out in one of the classrooms, and so my dad, being the guy that he was, he said, "Well, if you want babysitting jobs, then go ahead and fill out, why don't you give people your information, let them know that you wanted to babysit." So one week at Sunday school, I gave all the kids my information, and this family was one of the families that responded. So,
oh, cool. Now, when you found out that they had a disability, were you scared as a young kid? Were you like, "Oh, is this contagious? Is this"
oh, no, 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 not at all. When I started babysitting, they were 3, 4, and 5 years old. Um, the oldest, Eddie, was just starting to have trouble walking. The youngest, I didn't even know he also had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy because his walking wasn't as impaired. And so, no, it's more curiosity, asking a lot of questions of their mom about what they needed. And so through that time, we went from walking to needing braces on their legs, standing tables, wheelchairs, all the things. So, yeah, it was more curiosity. I was really glad that we had an opportunity to, I would go in the community with them. We went putt putting. I'd take them from, in the chair to the next hole, get them out of the chair, putt putt, get them back in the chair, go to the next hole. I mean, we just did all sorts of things like that, and they just lived life.
and you just I find this so fascinating because you know the question that I asked you about was it contagious because that's what a lot of if they don't know, a lot of kids think, is this something that I can get? you know they kind of shy away from, I don't know what to say to them. Did you have any contact with them prior before they gave you the job, or no? Was it
Not really. We went to the same church, but I did not know them. And but because they were kids, I did have a lot of exposure to other kids coming up and saying, "Why are you in that chair? or, kids ask questions really boldly. So, I had a real opportunity to say, his legs don't work like your legs work. And being able to talk to people about just very practically about this is not a taboo thing. It's just that his legs don't work the same as yours. Um, Things like that.
So before the experience that you had, what did you have any other action with anybody? I'm sorry, any other interaction, not like action like boom boom. Uh, but did you have any other interaction with people with disabilities before you got this job?
I really didn't. My mom was a nurse, so I was kind of glad that I had her, like it when I was babysitting, when the kids' mom and dads were gone. If I ran into something that I felt like I needed help with, I could always call my mom. So I was kind of glad to have that, just because of her nursing background. But no, I really didn't have any interaction with anybody else until then.
Oh, okay. And so, wow. Well, then at that point, I would just consider you that, since you didn't have any interaction with anybody else, I would just consider you that God really gave you that gift, it seems, to really deal with them, and that you started so much at a young age,
Mm-hmm.
at your preteen years where kids are starting to look at, I don't know, were you starting to look at boys at the age of 11?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. And,
So,
I think you're right, though. This is where God wanted me. And there's
yeah,
no question that babysitting job set the trajectory for my life. There's no question. And I'm so grateful to them for allowing me to learn and grow and pursue what I needed to pursue.
yeah. Yeah. Did you said something to me interesting when we did our pre-call that the the type of muscular dystrophy that they have,
Mhm.
but still specifically, I can't talk for a public speaker. God. Uh, Specifically came from the woman's gene, like
Right.
something
No,
within women got them to have the muscular dystrophy, and only boys could get it.
So it's Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. There's different forms of muscular dystrophy. And in their specific case, the genetic material comes from the mother, which is the cause for the muscular dystrophy, but only affects boys. So they also had a daughter, Sharon, and she was not affected because she was a woman, but she also could be a carrier because she was a woman. So and she ended up having 2 girls, and so, I don't know if she's ever gotten tested or not, but
That's so odd and
Mhm.
unique. That's really interesting. I'm gonna have to dive into that. So,
I asked his mom about that
yeah,
when, I asked her when I knew that Eddie was the oldest, having trouble walking, and, she said that they had him tested when she was pregnant with her 3rd, which was also a boy. So, she found out about the muscular dystrophy for Eddie when she was pregnant with Bill, so
wow, so that's so crazy and unique. I'm gonna have to do some. If anybody has the experience with the type of muscular dystrophy that Gene is talking about and dealt with, please reach out to me. My email is in my bio, nickspeaksofficial@gmail.com. I would love to have you on the show and talk about how you dealt with that, or even if you're a parent that dealt with that and the unique struggles that you had. So please reach out to me with that. So, you said that having this interaction with these boys really prepared you for your life's career, but you didn't really start here. You started with music therapy. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
did. Well, I really love music, and, so I went to school for music therapy. You may have heard of it. I don't know if people have or not, but, it's using music to work with people in different capacities. So it might be, physical issues that people might have, some maybe psychological or social issues that people are having, but using music to do that. And there's different forms of music therapy. You might find it in a nursing home, you might find it in a psychiatric setting. I specifically chose developmental disabilities. And the type of music therapy that I was trained with was Nordoff and Robbins music therapy, which is actually using the music to communicate with the other person. So whether the person has words or not to communicate, I would try to communicate through the music. So I would start with maybe, a melody that might fit that person, or fit their what I thought maybe their mood was, and then move into something different, see if we can continue to communicate through that music. And it was really awesome. The problem with it is that it is not considered to be funded very easily in our system. And so I did that for a few years, and it was unfortunately going to be something that they weren't going to offer anymore. And so then I started doing, actually, right before that, I started working as a QMRP, which is QIDP today, in a larger facility because my music therapy stuff wasn't getting into people's ISPs. So I started doing that piece and worked at a 119 bed facility for about 7 years until I
Wow.
moved into a group home kind of setting.
So that was the 119 bed facility, and we'll talk about this a little bit, was an institution that was back when we were still heavily um, into institutions in the country. And so,
Yeah. And there's still some ICFs that have, a number of people, 100 and, over 100 people living there. Those still exist. This was an ICF with 119 beds. Yeah. And when I did my internship for music therapy, I was at a large hospital up at similar to a developmental center to what we know here in Ohio, up in New York. And so when I got there, there was 4,000 people that lived on that campus. It used to have 9,000 people, but they had downsized to 4,000. And I stayed up there and did my music therapy internship for about, I can't remember, 9, 10 months, something like that.
now when you expressed to your parents that you were going to go into music therapy, were they like, "Gene, what the hell are you doing? You're not going to get a job."
Good question. It was my mom that heard about music therapy and she knew I liked music. And so she came and she knew that I liked helping people. So she came to me and said, "Why don't you explore this?" And I did a paper when I was a senior in high school, on music therapy and the effects of music therapy. And that's how I chose it. So yeah, I did get a degree in music education as well, just in case, because I was a little concerned that music therapy would be, something that would be hard to find.
Yeah. So did you have, when you started working heavily in the disabled field exclusively, did you have to go back to school and get a degree in like social work or anything like that?
No, not really. I used my music therapy degree, and was able to use that in really until I got my master's. I was able to use it throughout my career.
That's awesome. So you think that, especially with people that are on the autism spectrum, that music therapy is more of a thing as opposed to back then when people didn't really know what to do with?
That's a good question. I there were some really amazing situations that I lived through with music therapy, and there were people that didn't use words to communicate and sometimes really
Right.
had trouble with sensory kinds of input. And so a lot of times I would work with I would be on the piano and trying to maybe use a I would use like ragtime or blues or different styles of music, and then they would be on the drum. And so a lot of Nordoff and Robbins music therapy is focused on the response on the drums. So there's some people that would change what I was doing on purpose because they were avoiding me, or there were people that would come with me and like I'd move into something heavier and a heavier beat and a lot loud noise, and they would come with me for that, or maybe avoid me for that. So it's kind of a way to communicate without words. And so it was really amazing. I wish it was used more for sure.
So it's not used no more. That's kind of crazy with, everybody trying to figure out how do we communicate with nonverbal folks.
Mhm.
That
So that's North and Robbins music therapy. So there's other types of music therapy. People will use recreational music in like a nursing home for sure. Um, Especially memory care. If you take
Yep.
people back to another time, they're definitely using it in psychiatric situations where people might need to process emotions. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can approach it. There's some crazy and cool videos out there. If you Google music therapy, it's very neat.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do that. Because I would love to get more into it because I love music and I didn't know that you played the piano. I played the piano too. So that's cool. I'm gonna have to get you in a room with a piano and you're
Oh,
like
I don't know about that. It's been a while since I've been using the piano, but
you're like, no, oh come on, we'll tape it and make it part of a podcast. Come on.
no, I don't know. That would make me nervous. Today I'm not nervous, but that would make me nervous.
No, we won't do that. But that's an interesting fact. I love music too. So we have something in common there. So you let's talk about dynamic pathways now because it's something. Did you start this from the ground up?
I did. I had worked with someone else, actually helped start a company, but I was not the owner of it, that did individualized support for people under the waivers. And then when that company was sold, I started working with Dynamic Pathways, which both we can talk about as from a consulting standpoint, but I also worked with On the Mark Services, which was owned. I was a minority owner for that. The majority owner was my brother-in-law, and we did in-home services there too. So for a while, I did both On the Mark and Dynamic Pathways for quite a few years, like I think 17, like a lot.
Oh, why did you feel the need? What need did you see to start dynamic pathways?
I think there are times when people, well, they need support, right? So we really
Yeah.
were looking to how can we help support the gaps in the system. And so I had a lot of relationships already established across the state, which was really helpful for starting the company. And I wanted to be able to provide training and consulting to be able to help people do their job better. And so that came in lots of different forms.
Yeah, awesome. So you guys deal heavily. I talked about in the introduction about how you and I met. I spent 4 years on the Richland County Human Rights Committee, which to me was the best committee. And well, you don't run 43. You have people that help you. You're now in 43 counties out of the 88 that we are in here in Ohio. And I just thought our human rights committee was so much fun. I've heard that some of the bigger counties they're more dry and rigid. So I heard we had more fun.
Yeah.
Um, because you would do things like especially during the holidays. I remember one time, and one of our members, who I won't mention, was kind of a stick in the mud about it. But I remember one time you wanted to do for Christmas to open up the meeting, you wanted to do a progressive Christmas carol. And
You remember that. I do.
so we all, you said, come on, did we do Frosty the Snowman? Which
I
one
don't
did
remember what was I do like music.
Yeah. So you wanted to do this progressive Christmas carol, which I thought was cool. We all would sing one line at a time. And this guy was like, I'm not doing it. No, I'm not. No. And you're like, because you're just so bubbly and so fun. You're like, come on, have fun. You called his name and you said, come on, have fun. And he's like, nope. And I'm just like, what a Scrooge, But you did all kind of fun things like that, and then, of course, I was always trying to get pizza. I don't know, did we ever have pizza? I
We
think
did.
we
I
did,
do I
yeah.
think we did, yeah.
So I would, we had so much fun. And why don't you talk about the importance of a human rights committee and maybe for those who are, especially here in Ohio, I don't know how other states run, but why don't you talk about the importance of that and how maybe someone with a developmental disability can get involved in the human rights committee here in Ohio?
Certainly. You mentioned that we now have work in about 43 counties for Human Rights Committee. And the rationale behind having one, well, it's all rule based, but the reason why it's in the rule is because if um, someone's services include anything that would be a restriction, then those restrictions cannot just be approved at the team level. They have to go before a committee, which is the Human Rights Committee, that would take a look and determine, is there really truly a direct and serious risk of harm to support the use of that? So it has to go through another layer of review to be able to use it. So there's 5 areas that we address. If somebody's going to have a rights restriction at all, like, limiting cigarettes or something like that, any kinds of rights restrictions, any manual restraints, mechanical restraints, anything that would be timeout or a chemical restraint. Those are the 5 areas that come before an HRC. And so we used to do a lot more in person before COVID, and then
Yeah.
COVID happened. And so we do a lot more virtually now. But um, the rules call for a specific a balance between people with disabilities and family members to professionals on that committee, which I really, really appreciate. I was lucky enough to be able to participate in the rule writing of that rule the last 2 times, and so I was able to be a part of those discussions, which I so appreciated because we've actually had HRC meetings that have completely shifted course. The conversations completely shifted course based on maybe somebody with a disability or family member's comments. And in our system, we need to listen better. We just really need to listen
Yeah.
better and have people participate better. So there are opportunities for sure. Most committees meet probably monthly. Some of the small counties only meet quarterly, but most of the committees meet monthly, and there's an opportunity there. Some counties actually pay people with disabilities to participate, to be a part of that, and when that's happened, people really take it very seriously, and I'm glad they do because this is important stuff. If we're talking about restricting someone's rights or holding them down or anything like that, that's kind of important stuff. And so they get the materials ahead of time, they prep and do the reading, and sometimes they might have to have some assistance. We've suggested people use their teams to talk about what assistance they need with that, and then we hold the committee meeting and determine whether or not that's something that is warranted, and that we really talk a lot about making it temporary. These are not things that we're allowed to just do to people and keep doing to people. If there's a direct and serious risk of harm and it's needed for the moment, okay. If that risk of harm is removed, then there's not a reason for us to still try to unduly control people.
Right. Right. And something you said in our free call was that you felt like our system sometimes tries to automatically, maybe I'm saying it wrong, so correctly if I am, but you said you feel like our system tries to automatically control somebody simply because of their disability. And you talked about how we need to get away from that and how most people don't like to be controlled. I would say anybody, you know?
Right. My company does a lot of behavior support as well. And so I kind of come at things from that perspective as well. And people are people. So sometimes we do have to protect people. Sometimes we have to maybe use a hold, or sometimes we do have to, we do have to put restrictions in place because the person's going to end up jailed or worse. So those kinds of things, when they're needed and warranted, I get it. But if they're not, then sometimes we, as a system, I think, and people in the system, we tend to want to stop that behavior or, create something that, that stops what that person's doing. And then sometimes that turns into control. And way more often than I would like to see. So it's not helpful. Most people don't respond to being controlled
Yeah.
by just being subservient. There's a lot of people that will push back, right? So now we have new issues, right? Because the person's like, get out of my face. So yeah, I think there's times when we feel desperate, or there's been an MUI or something like that, and so then we'll figure out a way to keep that from happening again. But that way that we're keeping it from happening again might be restrictive. So yeah, it's easy to happen. And when COVID came, boy, I watched our system just really clamp down on people again. I love the whole system, the whole world clamped down, but during
Yeah.
the time too. But it was really easy for us to start to control again because we had permission, because of the pandemic. So, but most of the time people don't like that. People get better when they choose to get better.
Yeah.
So if we can help you find your way to getting better, then absolutely, right? So that you could live a better life for you, not a better life for me. It's a better life for
Right.
you. So,
And when you talk about getting better, you're not talking about somebody getting cured from their disability. You're talking about,
no, I'm talking about living a better life, having less anxiety, having less
yeah,
stress, having less reasons for me to fall apart. Really, honestly.
yeah, less
Mhm.
depression, less, yeah,
Yep. And lots of times we end up talking about, somebody's diagnosis at a HRC meeting or something, and I'm thinking it's no different than anybody else. I mean, there's an
yeah,
awful lot of people with depression that don't have developmental disabilities too. So why are we treating people with developmental disabilities differently when they
yeah,
have depression?
yeah. Because one of the main things that, you know, our community talks about is we don't want to be treated any differently
Exactly.
of our disability. And so but then I feel like some people struggle with that because they say they don't want to be treated any differently. And then when somebody treats them quote unquote normal, whatever that is, they're like, I have a disability, So it's a fine line.
That's very insightful, Nick. I think, I see that happen. One of the contracts that I have through Dynamic Pathways is to be the Synergy chairperson for the Synergy conference. And boy, do we ever talk about those kinds of things, because there are needs where people need some help based on their disability. But if we're really going to treat people equally, then why are we always calling out their disability? So sometimes you're absolutely right. Sometimes maybe the person with the disability is like, wait a minute, I'm used to being identified by my disability, and now all of a sudden you're not doing that. I don't know what to do with that. Um, so that's a really, really good point. There's a lot of growing to do for everybody, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, what do you think about the new language that's come out, or especially over the past few years? Differently abled, I don't have a disability, I have abilities. I don't like that. I come out very heavily against it because
How's that?
you know, I come out very heavily against it because um this generation and a couple of the generations past and the generation coming up are always talking about stand in our truth, be part of be proud of who you are. Not that your disability to me has anything to do with who you are. I mean, I've said I'm so much more than a disability. I love music. I'm not a disability. My body is disabled, but I am not CMV. I'm
Mhm.
someone who's had it. So what's your feeling on that?
It's a really good question. I honor that people are trying to explore and figure out, how they see themselves and how the world sees them and where they want to
Sure.
their place in the world. It's like how I was exploring that through my babysitting job, honestly. So I completely honor all of that. I do think that there are times it's really funny, like we come up with names. Sometimes we'll say people with hearing impairments, but then if you ask the deaf community, they say, no, I'm deaf. Don't call me a person with a hearing impairment because we're using people first language. They'll say, I'm deaf. So it's really interesting that what I really don't like about it is when people that aren't living with a disability, although we all have disabilities, but no, not living with maybe a disability that's served by our system or something like that. If
Yeah.
that's the case, I would listen to the people who are living it, not the people who aren't living it. Why are we coming up with titles? That's ridiculous, or
Right.
ways that we're identifying people. So I just feel like we get narrow, right? We get into this game of having labels, or that's not the label I want. I want a different label. And I feel like if we're busy doing that, we're not really seeing each other as human beings.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I want to ask you about also there's this whole thing about, and I'm gonna try to make you laugh. I think I will, and I think everybody else will too. There's this whole thing about, I'm disabled, so I don't want to be labeled inspiration porn. And
Yeah.
I've always said, if I inspire you and I don't have to take my clothes off, I'm good. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, if I inspire somebody because of what I do, because remember, I mean, the bar for people with physical disabilities or mental disabilities is already set so low. I mean, these doctors come out, which I feel like that's why parents struggle so much, because the doctors come out and say, your kid's going to have this and they're not going to be able to live on their own. And they're going to be, they're not going to be able to have these types of food, or they're not going to be able to play sports like, their brother or sister who has no problems. And then when, we surpass all that, the parents and the doctors are like, what the hell do we do?
Mhm. Yeah.
You know? So what do you think about the inspiration porn aspect?
Well, first of all, when you talked about people being told that their son or daughter isn't going to be able to do anything, it made me think of Gwen Harshaw and Zane Harshaw. Do you know Zane?
Yeah.
Yeah, and, his mom and dad talk about how they were told, he wasn't gonna be able to do anything, and he had to go to OT to learn to button his shirt, but now he plays the guitar like an amazing I mean, like, he's
Yeah,
just
he does.
crazy good, and, so it just kind of their point, his mom and dad's point is that, you know, don't really listen to all that, because we're going to be focused on what they can't do instead of what they can do. I think that's a really strong message. And, I have one child with ADD, but he's married and has two kids. One of them has ADD, and I think it's kind of funny,
Yeah.
because a little bit turnabout's fair play. But I've never lived something where, maybe the person had more struggles than that. So, in terms of like developmental disabilities. So I can't really speak from that vantage point, but I really appreciate what the Harshaws say about that, because I think that's probably very true. So if we're really focused, it seems to me that the people who were raised to just fit in, and not fit in, but what's the word? Just participate like everybody else, just come on along, go putt putting. you know, um, the people that have approached life that way tend to do a little bit better,
Yeah.
um, just because they're finding their potential, which, by the way, is no different than people without disabilities, because we're looking to find our potential, right? So I tend to agree that, if we're focused on people's limitations, that's what we're going to be focused on, and that's not necessarily going to be the best for that person. I think we need to focus on what their abilities are. And again, I'm not talking about people in developmental disability world. I'm talking about everybody.
Right. Right. And I think that's where I've struggled a lot, because I feel like, and I'm very open about my story, and I share that, you know, everything that I'm doing now, everyone that I grew up around said I would not be able to do it. I would not be able to live on my own. I would not be in a romantic relationship. I would not have a job. And so it was very hard for me, because everybody around me was like, well, Nick can't do that because of his situation. Well, first of
Mhm.
all, why are we referring to a disability as a situation, as if it's like an issue or something?
Well, yeah, and you mentioned problems, like people, having problems. Everybody's got problems. Some of them are visible, some of them are invisible. Some qualify people for the system, some don't. I mean, that's just life.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to something with the HRC a minute. I'm sorry that I'm jumping around, but
I
this
don't
is
care. That's good.
is great because we have a genuine conversation. I want to go back to something with HRC, and I'm going to say part of the diagnosis name of it. And you can probably finish the rest. But what do you do when somebody has it's called Willy syndrome or something where they
Oh,
eat
Prader-Willi syndrome?
what do you do when somebody says, "But I really love food and I wanna, I wanna eat 10 hot dogs, and it doesn't matter that, I can't tell that I'm full or whatever." Just what do you do with that?
That's a unique disability. It's very rare. And some of my favorite people have Prader-Willi syndrome. I've worked with lots of people who do, and so it's an interesting concept because we have to look at an HRC. We have to look for direct and serious risk of harm. So because people with Prader-Willi, uh, it's actually a problem with their hypothalamus, and so the hypothalamus helps to regulate your body when it comes to hunger, when it comes to hot and cold, pain, those kinds of things. So, because the hypothalamus is affected, then they don't know when they're full. So, they will eat and eat and eat because they don't ever really feel full. They did do some studies where they found out that people started getting full over a slow period of time. So there was some effect on it on your hunger, but it was so slow that it wasn't obvious. It would put the person at risk. So we have a lot. The rules say that we can't withhold food from people, and there's a lot of times when people are like, "Oh, Jean overeats," or I went to my doctor and my chart says I'm obese. Okay, whatever. I don't know. But we can't necessarily withhold people or food from people just because their chart says they're obese. Nobody's withholding my food. And so we look a lot at equal citizenship when it comes to the HRC rule. And the distinction for people with Prader-Willi syndrome is that because of their uh, eating and their continuous eating, the direct and serious risk of harm for them is that their stomach can rupture or they can get necrosis in their stomach. So most people with PW do not throw up, and so there could be something rancid happening in their stomach and some kind of infection brewing that we don't know about because they won't end up throwing up, and so that can cause sudden death. Both of those issues can cause sudden death. So could choking cause sudden death. So those are the kinds of things that we focus on. It's not so much that we want to control somebody's food intake because we're really not allowed to do that. I mean, if we look at equal citizenship, there are people with diabetes all over the world that are not following their doctor's recommendation.
Right.
So if you have a developmental disability, all of a sudden now you do have to follow a doctor's recommendation for diabetes. That's not really what we're looking for. So, and I'll have people tell me, well, sooner or later that will kill them, and I get that, but that's why we talk about direct and serious risk of harm, meaning not just a risk of harm, but a direct and serious one. And how it applies when we're talking about people with Prader-Willi syndrome is that it is direct and serious because of that sudden death possibility.
I we had a case one time where I asked you a question about, so are we supposed to allow somebody to want to kill, and this is really dark, but to want to take their own life, or if that's what they, and you said that's kind of really dark, and you kind of explained it to me. I don't know if you remember what you
I
said.
do remember this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember what I said, but so, when there's risk like that, is it direct and serious is what we have to look at from the rule standpoint. But and I deal with this all the time where people are saying, so we're just supposed to let them die. And no,
Yeah.
no, never supposed to let them die. We're supposed to be teaching, we're supposed to be encouraging, we're supposed to be, that's what services are about. So, if I didn't want to do anything and be a couch potato and never move and just continue to eat and have health issues because of that, we're going to teach all the way through that, and we're going to encourage movement, and there's so many things we can do, right? And so I don't know why sometimes when people come to us, they say, well, we just want to lock their food. Well, what else are we doing? We have to show that we're doing the less restrictive measures first. And then if somebody truly is getting to a place where they're a brittle diabetic or there's a direct and serious risk of harm, then we can consider it. But boy, we should have been doing all the other stuff already. And that's my argument, is that that's not always the most restrictive, is not always the answer. You can keep locking my food, but never deal with me understanding food or understanding why I'm eating it like I eat or things like that. Um,
Right.
Now, with people with Prader-Willi syndrome, there's a lot of blocking of the food because of that direct and serious risk of harm.
But so how does someone come to that determination? Okay, we realize that this is a rights restriction, but how does somebody come to that determination whether, okay, it's okay, we have to do this?
I think the team has the team is this. I consider it the sacred place. That's the place where your trusted advisors are gathered around you, and they're saying, "How can we best help you?" Um, One of the people that I just love, she's the oldest person with Prader-Willi in the state, and I asked her if she would do a video for me because there was a question about unlocking her food, unlocking food for people with PW, not necessarily hers. And I asked her, she's same age as me, so she's 66, and she has lived this syndrome, and asked her if she would be able to share her perspective so that I could share it with other people when I go out and train. And she did an incredible job saying, that if you don't unlock my food, I'm going to eat it and I could die. And she knows that. So, in her situation, it's so cool because she's come to understand her disability or syndrome. She's come to understand why it happened. She knows it's a problem with her hypothalamus. It's nothing she did, nothing their parents did, nothing like that. And she's kind of come to grips with that. And I think it's awesome, that she knows what she needs. Does that have to come to HRC? Yes, because we're locking her food.
So it has to, because you're given a rights restriction.
Right. So if the team really is trying to determine that we got to try all the other positive measures first, but is there that direct and serious risk of harm? Those are the questions that'll be asked at an HRC. And those are the things that the team is going to have to be able to answer. Either, I mean, we usually look at their plan, but then we'll usually ask questions at that committee meeting too.
Now, has the team ever gotten in trouble because they put a rights restriction on before coming to you guys?
There have been citations at the state level for that, where somebody will read a plan and, it might say something like, I don't know, Jean gets 3 pops a day and that's all I get. Well, don't mess with my pop, you know what I mean? Um, Although
Mhm.
I'm drinking a lot less Diet Coke than I ever did before, but, and that was my decision. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, if that's in the plan and everybody thought it was a good idea, but didn't really realize that that was a rights restrictions, then, through the accreditation team, when the state comes out and takes a look at the counties or takes a look at providers, sometimes citations will result because of that, because that's against the rules, and you'd have to go to before HRC. So the team would probably at that point get back together and determine what is the best choice. Do we really want to go to HRC and submit that Jean really it's not good for her to have more than 3 pops a day? Is that going to be something that we're really going to get past? Is there a direct and serious risk of harm? No, there really isn't. We just think it's good for her. Well,
Right.
it's my
Well, it's
decision.
good for anybody to have 3 or 4 pops a day, probably. But
Probably
like you
not.
said, we're not restricting
Right.
anybody else without a disability. And so,
We look a lot at equal citizenship when it
yeah,
comes to that. Yep.
yeah, and I appreciate that. So something else we talked about in the pre-call, I referred to the pre-call a lot, ladies and gentlemen, because I don't have a script here in front of me because I'm blind as shit. I can't see. So that's why if you're always wondering why are you always referring back to the pre-call, that's why I do it. So something we talked about in the pre-call, something that's coming up and that a lot of people are afraid of is the potential property tax elimination.
Mhm.
And county boards are scared, as my case manager put it, everybody's pooping their pants.
Yeah.
uh, because we do, and you can help me with this. Our state is unique, along with two other states, Missouri and North Carolina, in the fact of that the three of us are still run by county boards. And we in the state of Ohio have 88 counties, so 88 county boards, which means 88 ways of doing things
Mhm.
different.
Mhm.
And so is it a 40-60 match or a 60-40 or tell me how that.
Government pays 60% on well, that percentage changes from day to day, but it's about 40-60, and the government pays the 60% of services, and the state pays the others,
and
or
then
levy dollars or local dollars.
and then the county boards pick up the 40%.
Right.
Okay. So, and this is not just going to affect um developmental disabilities. This is going to affect police, fire, school systems.
Yes.
But because we're in our own community, and I'm sure every other community is like the same, is that, everybody's freaking out because our system's going to be gutted if this happens. And no matter who gets in office, because it goes to the ballot, whether it's Amy Acton or Vivek Ramaswamy. Aren't you proud of me? I can say these names.
That's awesome.
Um, Either one, if they get in office, they can't do anything about it because it's going to go to the ballot. So it really is up to Ohioans, right?
Well, it would have to be something that would legislation would happen for.
Oh,
And I think that there are states that don't have the same kind of setup as we do with property taxes. But you're correct. A lot of our property taxes go to different government services, right? So, and levies. When you're voting for a levy, even for DD or maybe for mental health or schools or whatever, when you're voting for those levies, that's where that's happening. Is that you're voting that so much money from your property taxes would go in that direction. So people do have a say about where that goes. But if we remove property taxes, then there has to be another way of funding the system. There just has to be. So for those people that feel like all of a sudden there won't be any services. I can't imagine that that would actually play out that way, because there's way, way, way too many people that are served in the community, that are served not only just in the DD system, but in all the other systems. So there'll be an awful lot of planning. Other states that don't do it like we do it, they have a different state budget that funds those services. So I think it would be an incredibly huge undertaking to change the system. Um, if it happens, it's going to happen with an awful lot of planning, because we're not going to be able to just cut off people's services and then they won't be safe. I mean, we're not allowed to do that with Medicaid dollars. Medicaid says that we have to be able to assure that people are healthy and safe if we're approving Medicaid dollars, and that's what the county boards do. So if somebody isn't healthy and safe any longer, if you decided to run the streets all the time and never get services, and we say we can't locate Nick because he's just running around or whatever.
right,
And maybe you're being unsafe at that point, right? Then that jeopardizes waivers, because we're
right,
we're supposed to be able to assure the federal government, CMS, that people are healthy and safe. So to
yeah,
me, this is also an issue about health and safety. And I think that not only that piece is making, I think I agree with you that people are pretty darn nervous out there right now. And I think that that's happening for sure. But I also think that any change in administration also creates some unrest in our system. And so we're also seeing that that's going to be changing soon too. So, yeah, I mean, it's not this most stable time in our system, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of times where I think this happens every 2 to 4 years, Gene. I mean, one party takes over and then another party says, well, this party's horrible and they hate people with disabilities. Look, we haven't updated the ADA in 36 years. And, that was a bipartisan bill that was passed. And so, you know, people need to come together and say, first of all, what can we do to update the ADA? Because I was talking to somebody who's actually hopefully going to be on our podcast this next week after your episode airs, and she was saying that when the ADA come out, it really didn't have any teeth to
Mm.
begin with anyway, and it does really need to be updated because everybody champions that. Yay, we don't have to crawl up steps anymore, which that's great, but there's so much
There's so much more. So
more
much
to
more.
be done. So,
Yes.
oh,
I
and
completely agree.
for those of you when Gene said, if Nick's out running around in the streets, this wheelchair is just a gimmick. I really get up and run around my office all the time. So yeah, I
Go
just have
for it. Yeah.
yeah. So I have a lot of fun. I do roam the streets and everybody knows me. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was fun. I had to get that in there. Um, because a lot of people with this in Ohio, especially with the I don't want to get too much into this, because everybody's like, oh, politics. If you come out and say you support one side, you're evil, blah, blah. But a lot of people, they think because of the current administration that's in Washington that everybody's going to be institutionalized. And I just want to give a little bit of information that I just found out. There are still 35 states that have institutions. I just found this out. And the general number that these 35 states spend on institutions per year is like $200,000. So I really feel, and you can give your expertise on this, that if we now there are still some need for some type of institution, like we talked about ICFs, and we
Mhm.
talked about, well, we didn't mention nursing homes, but those are there too. And I'm sure there's some need of it. But one of the things I hear all the time, Gene, is just because you have $500,000 for your labor services doesn't mean you get to spend $500,000. And then I heard the statistic about the $200,000 being spent a year in these 35 states to keep institutions open. And everybody that I talk to in the government system, when it comes to people with disabilities, is we're trying to save money. So wouldn't it be better to come up with more community living options so that we can take that $200,000 burden off the 35 states that have it?
Yeah, I don't know what the current statistics are, but I do know that there was a time when people were really collecting data around the it's cheaper to live in the community.
Right.
And so but I think in the last, we've had a real focus on youth in Ohio and serving youth. And as we were going through some of that, I started wondering how many people we're going to be able to truly support. Honestly, I mean, there's an awful lot of people. When I hear counties saying, what the percentage of increase of the new people that they're serving in a year is, it's a lot. And so,
Yeah.
and I think part of that is because, we have kind of identified the DD system for some youth that didn't know that they existed for sure, because we've been able to, focus on youth, I guess. So I just, as we were doing it, I kept watching and going, when are we going to run out of money? I mean,
Yeah.
we can't serve that many people. So how do you do that and do that fairly and rightly and, all of that? And so I think, we also all of a sudden started approving a lot of 2-on-1 and even other, I met somebody that was a 4-on-1, uh, 4 staff for one
What? That's an
person.
entourage. Like,
Now they were in the community. Oh, okay. I'm great. I mean, I'm grateful that they're in the community. I just don't know that that's living life in the community. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not a big one for institutions for sure. But I do have there are going to be some financial pressures that we've got to look at. And we just have to. And so some of the times when I'm thinking about some of the some of the difficulties about serving people. Let me give an example. Sometimes we're asked to be the criminal justice system. Somebody's been before a judge. They're saying, okay, this person needs staffing around the clock because of their dangerous behavior in the community. We're not going to put them in the jail, whatever. Sometimes we're asked to be doing what the criminal justice system is doing, and we call it homemaker personal care. So, okay, I'm going to help you cook, but I'm also gonna be criminal justice. Do you know what I mean? And so sometimes our systems get a little blurred, I believe.
can
And
you explain that a little further about the criminal justice piece and how you think we're asked to be that in the DD system?
so let's say somebody was before a judge for assault.
Okay.
And they didn't end up going to jail because they were incompetent. So maybe they're underneath, some other kind of order to sometimes the orders is that the DD system's going to deal with it. And basically that's what it says. And so then our answer to that is to give staffing. So we give staffing to somebody who assaulted someone who, I mean, if the person needs the staffing because of a developmental disability as well, different story in my mind. But if it's just because that person ended up, I mean, my son with ADD could have ended up in my system, in our system. I mean, today I could justify that. I can tell you a bunch of stories of where he fell short because of his ADD. But that, that's not what was needed. I mean, he didn't need those services, but sometimes when you get in front of a judge, then they'll kind of mandate over here to DD services. And then what we know to do is to keep them safe based on what the judge said. So lots of times that translates into staffing. And then there are people that, let's say they grew up in the foster care system and they think, boy, I'm almost 18, I'm going to be free. And then we evaluate them and we say, okay, we moved you from the foster care system now into DD. And so now you have 24-hour staffing in DD because we know what your foster care situation looked like. And so people a lot of times end up calling for a behavior specialist because their behaviors are out of control because they can't stand it. So
Because stand having somebody around them
get out
24/7.
of my face. I don't need you. Why are you treating me like this? So we've got to come up with better and more creative ways to support people. And our answer, our typical answer is we're going to just staff it. So it's more hours is the answer. Not always. I mean, I did residential for a long, long time, and there's only so much a residential provider can do. There's lots they can do when it comes to certain things, but when we're trying to teach and support and all that kind of thing. But if somebody is supposed to, I don't know, some of the orders say crazy things like, you do what your plan says in the DD system, or do what the DD board says, or do what your provider says. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Um,
That's a human rights about yeah,
it
right there.
is. So then that, those are some of the challenges. Now, this isn't common. It's more rare, but it does happen. So I always am looking at what does homemaker personal care do? And we can do lots of things with homemaker personal care, but it's homemaker personal care. Doesn't even have a therapeutic title. We do have some therapeutic kinds of things we talk about with like trauma informed care and things like that, but it is homemaker personal care. So it's just interesting to me how because our system tends to have resources, then we paint everything like DD and then set it over there, and it's not always DD. So,
Yeah, well, something I'll wrap this up in a few minutes, but something else we talked about was versus underserving and overserving, and we kind of segue into that because of the shortage that we're facing just across the country. Although I feel like it's gotten a little bit better here in Ohio,
yeah.
because you know I did work with Bridge to Equality, and there were other groups that worked on it. So I think our shortage is it's not probably where it should be, but it's not where it was. But we talked about in the pre-call about versus overserving and underserving. How does a case manager on a team determine, hey, this person's being underserved or overserved? And how do
You
we
know,
manage that?
we have those assessment tools and we're using the DDP now. It'll be moving to the NRI as that's going to happen over a couple of years, really, rest of this year and all of 27. But so we're using those assessment tools. But I think I used an example of my cousin. My cousin receives services up in
Yep.
Cleveland. And when he moved out for the first time out of the family home because my aunt passed and my uncle needed support in an assisted living facility, um, he there was an opening in a place where he could go, and so he gets 24/7 services. He didn't get 24/7 services before. He's very independent. He moves around his community, but he's kind of overserved a little bit because that's what was available for him when the crisis happened. So I think we end up, and what can we do about those things? I think we can recognize them and then continue to work toward. We can't just rip the rug out from underneath people, but we can continue to address it and work toward it and determine, maybe at some point we recognize that, that he's going to move with a little less services. And
Yeah.
doesn't have to necessarily stay there. So, yeah, it just really depends person by person. It's very specific kind of thing, but that's part of the role of the team every year anyway, is to look at what you need. Are you overserved? Are you underserved? Are there other resources out in your community that you can use? You don't have to rely on DD. I mean, if you rely on us alone, we're going to screw it up.
Yeah.
So I think, maybe you rely on some other opportunities out in the community. Maybe there's other stuff there. And so that's the creative thinking that it takes a lot of energy but it's needed. It's absolutely needed. We call it person-centered planning, but I'd love to change it to kind of like creative thinking, or creative planning for people or something like that. Because it doesn't translate all the time into what's your best life look like? Um, is your best life really only depending on the DD system and only having the people in your life that are with your provider agency and your ADS? Is that
Right.
really the best life for you? I mean, it's their choice, not mine, in terms of what their best life is. But we tend to say this is what the system provides, and there's so much more to people's lives. I
Right.
think we have to keep
Right.
being challenged.
And I would like to either see that person centered change, or for counties to really start implementing it, because I've been in this system, in this particular system here in Ohio since 2016.
Mhm.
And there's been a lot of times where I felt like this is not person centered for me. This is what makes it easier for the county, what makes it easier for the provider, and I understand everybody has to make concessions and work together. But if you're sitting here saying this is person centered, this is all around you and what makes your best life for you, and then you're constantly telling me no or I don't know, where
Mhm.
does the person centered part come? you
Yeah.
know? So
Yeah.
yeah,
I
I'm
I
with
I I agree with you. I think that I person-centered planning sometimes gets replaced with guardian-centered planning
you.
or accreditation-centered planning or staffing centered planning. Those are all barriers and pressures in our system that tend to take over. And so, yeah, it can be, I mean, things that we have to address, but let's address them. Okay, we've got smart people sitting around the room trying to figure it out. Let's figure out what our choices are. But we're so limited. We stay within our system and it's so insular. And I think that there's more to life than DD system. I'll tell you that.
Well, do you think the DD system, whether it's here or across other states, need to look at partnering with other systems in the community to try to, because I know our DD system and the committee that I'm on right now, they're basically saying we're out of money or we're going to be out of money in this
A lot of
certain
money, there's a
time.
lot of financial pressures for sure. I mean, people are gonna have to look at where else can you, get support? Is that your church? Is that your I don't know. There's lots of choices, but we've gotten so accustomed to just it has to be paid support that I mean, when I think about things that are really important to me, for instance, my faith is very important to me.
Right.
If I counted on the DD if I was in the DD system receiving supports and I counted on the DD system to help my faith journey,
Yeah.
I'm not sure, how that would be supported, how well that would be supported, let me say it that way. I mean, somebody might be able to get me to church, but then staff's gonna call off and I might not be able to get to church the next time. Why am I not reaching out to the church and saying, "Hey, church, is there somebody there that can pick me up?"
Yeah.
It's somebody that can bring me so that, it's a church for heaven's sakes. People should do it. Come and get me, So, things like that, but we don't think of that. We don't automatically go there because it takes work. So,
A lot of churches don't have, especially in my case, handicap accessible transportation. That was something that I grew up with as a struggle.
right?
I was lucky that my parents had it. For years, we didn't. And my brothers just picked me up like a sack of potatoes and put
Yep.
me in a regular van. And then we got a lift when I was like teenage year.
Yep.
But so
So what does
yeah,
that look like, right? I mean, it takes more work, but I think it does, and you shouldn't rely on your case manager or people in the system to do it. I really want people to be able to speak up and say, no, I want to go to that church without my staff. This is my staff because I can't get in the door. That doesn't make sense. We've got to help people to live the life they want to live that's not dependent on us. Now, some things are going to be dependent. I completely get that. I
right.
understand it. But what I'm saying is when we have people that are solely dependent on us. So I like to ask the question, what's the most important thing in your life? My marriage. I, I
Yeah.
can't. Staff aren't going to help me with my marriage. I've got to help myself with my marriage.
Right. Right.
Things like that. So I just keep wondering what's most important in your life. And I think that's the question that's the question we should be asking, I think, when we're talking about outcomes that we're looking at, what do you want to have change in your life? What's the most important thing to you? Well, I really, really, really love music, but I can't ever get to a concert. I can't ever belong in a choir. I can't, I mean, what's that look like?
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
well, I think too, I mean, this is why I say, and I think one of the ways that people that are in the D system that we can become less dependent on them is if we raise the stubborn number from the Department of Labor from 22.7% of people who are gainfully employed with a disability to more like, I don't know, 60%,
yeah.
because 80% of people with developmental disabilities are, according to the Department of Labor, from a statistic in 2023, are not gainfully employed. And I think that's because we have a bunch of voc rehab programs all across the country that aren't really thinking outside of the box. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been told that I'm unemployable and I have nothing to offer an employer
Mhm.
here in Ohio. So, which is why I'm building my own brand, which is great for me because I don't have to,
Yeah.
which is great for me because I don't have to kiss anybody's ass. So,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, um, But still, I mean, if you want people to become less dependent on a system, which I preach all the time, we have to give people more opportunity to make money outside of the system. And oh, by the way, change the first $65 needs to be reported to Social Security. Okay, that's ridiculous.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and we have to change the rules a little bit. Well, you can't have anything over $2,000 in your bank account. What? You
Yeah.
know, that's just ridiculous. Anyway, I could preach all
Yeah.
day.
The onset of the stable account was a really good thing for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I agree with you. I think I just feel like it's about relationships. The people that have a job at a location where people really get each other, and you're doing the job and they're loving you and you're loving them, and there's a little bit of acceptance that needs to go along with just
Yeah.
any employee, right? So, in those situations, people are keeping those jobs and loving those jobs and living them, and they're not turning over at all. They're there for 20 years, 30 years, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So why can't we be helping that happen? Is that happening through our job coaching? Maybe a little bit. Maybe people are going out on their own. I know somebody that just skipped job coaching altogether and went and applied at places and interviewed and got a job. I was like, good for you. Don't wait
Yeah.
for us. Good
Yeah.
for you.
I love that. And, a lot of people told me from the beginning, Nick, you're going to have to carve your own path, which is what I've done
Mhm.
and still doing. It's hard. I kind of laugh at people who say, I want to be my own boss and make my own hours. Do you really know what the hell you're saying?
Very hard work. Very, very hard work. Yeah.
Yeah. And you throw a disability on top of that where you're dealing with pain and everything else and trying to
Mhm.
get to appointments. Um, you
Yep.
better be sure that you're built for this because you're not going to make, $1 million your first year. It's going to be 3 to 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how long it takes to get the business off the ground to make some serious money.
Very true. That
So,
is so true. Yeah.
yeah. So,
When you say that, it makes me think back to the beginning of dynamic pathways and some of those struggles that we had in the very beginning. In June, we're going to be celebrating our 27th year, and I just can't even believe that. And so. But you're right. I mean, right now we have, I think, 26, 27 people here that are working. And so, in the beginning, there was two of us. And that was
yeah.
it. So, yeah, it takes a long time.
Yeah. And right now it's just, me and then my producer, I send him all the stuff and he edits everything. But then I do my TikTok and that's on my own. And then I do, a Facebook blog and all this. And I'm just like, I wish and people ask me all the time, Nick, you should be on this social media platform. And I'm like, look, I have three of them and I don't even manage one of them because it's just too much. If I add more, I'm going to need to start hiring a social media team, which requires money,
Yeah.
and I don't have that right now.
So let me ask you this, would you trade it?
No, no.
See? So you're living your life, right? You're living
Yeah,
what you wanna live, even though it's tough, it's hard,
it is.
but it's rewarding, and, yeah, that's what I think. People want to have a purpose in life, and, if you're living your purpose, people are asking me all the time about whether I'm retiring, and I'm like, "No, I'm not retiring." Not now. I mean, I'm living my purpose, and I'm finding joy in that, and so, that's what I think that would be the best thing, for my kids, for my family, for people I know, for my friends. I just want you to be able to live your purpose. And that's it's an exciting thing when that's happening. So,
Before we go, you briefly touched on your faith. How has your faith played a role in what you do now? Like,
that's interesting. My since my husband was in ministry, he's the one that first said, "This is your ministry." And I was like,
yeah,
"Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see that." Um, it's so much of um I know when there's something that I'm doing that ends up making a difference for people, then that's when I can see that this is in line with what God is asking me to do. And so, I have a big picture in my office of water coming through rock. And that's it's here because that's my personal mission statement is that I want to be able to continue to work on something until it makes a difference where water's cutting through rock. It takes a long time, but that it would make a difference. And so, um, when I see that happening, I know it's not about me, that it's about what God wants for me, or how he wants to use me. So that's probably the best example I could give.
Yeah, I love that. And you truly have I mean, we could do 3 or 4 episodes together, and we probably will in the future, but you truly have a caregiver heart, obviously, from the story that you told about how you started in 11. And I I just we need more people like you. We need younger people. Not that there's a problem with older people, but we need younger people
Yep.
to pick up the torch a little bit, because one of the things that my caregiver and I talk about all the time is, he talks about who's going to take care of me when I need a caregiver. I mean, the field's in pretty rough shape now. What's it going to look like 10 years from now? And 30 years. I mean, what are we going to do? And so we
Yeah.
really need more people like Gene, like other people I've had on the show, because I mean, people grow up fast. Time happens in a blink. And yeah,
And most of us, unless we get hit by a bus and die or something, most of us are going to need help some point, right? I mean, my
yeah,
mother-in-law lives
say
in a
that
memory
all the
care
time. Yep.
facility. Yep. And
Said
so
your mother what? I'm sorry.
my mother-in-law, she lives in a memory care facility. And so we go to see her on Sundays. We actually have been doing church with her at the memory care place. But yeah, I mean, sooner or later, I'm going to need help. You know, people need help. It's not a it there's an unequal power dynamic that sometimes is out there between the caregiver and the person that's receiving the care. Somehow we send a message of, I'm capable and you're not. And that is a deadly message to send.
Yeah.
Because you know what? I have disabilities too. I mean, they don't qualify me for services in the system, but I can't find my way anywhere. I am terrible at directions. Just terrible. But, and it drives my husband crazy. But, but it there shouldn't be that unequal power dynamic. Just because I'm able-bodied maybe, or something like that, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. We should be supporting each other because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. So, any final words for somebody maybe who is just looking to start out in this system, or maybe they're brand new and they're like, I don't know. I think I got in over my head.
You know what? That's a good question. I would say that the people that I run across that I work with, and I do a lot of consulting in different capacities, and we do some strategic planning, and we have a nursing team that goes out. We have, does medication administration training, all of that stuff. The people that tend to get it and the people that tend to really understand are the ones that have spent time doing some kind of direct support. So my advice would be go do the work, and then you'll understand the work, and you'll be a better SSA. You'll be a better provider. You'll be a better day program provider. I mean, go do the work and spend time with people. Um, those are the folks that I tend to they understand the culture of what's going on. Um, that would be my advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, this business is people.
It
And
is.
I think that we get so wrapped up in the care plans. Well, it's not in the care plan. I'm not going to do it. Yes, you need to follow the care plan. That's the Bible of sorts to tell you how to do your job. But at the end of the day, you need to get to know the person. You need to get to know
Absolutely.
what their habits are, what they hate, and some of those plans, a lot of those, which I don't even like mine. Mine it's so repetitive. It's just like it says Nick likes Taco Bell like 20 times. Everybody knows that already. My staff certainly know it, and they sometimes hate me for it, but you know, it's just so get to know the person outside of the care plan
Mhm.
too, because I think that's so vital.
Yeah, even, when we're trying to make decisions, at an HRC, for instance, or when I'm trying to, if I'm a behaviorist on someone's team, I'm always looking at it from that perspective to say, what is it that you need? How much, um, do we have some kind of power struggle going on? Because if we do, that's going to create issues, with the services. And so, how can we really get to know that person? And then let that be reflected. Unfortunately, we're reflecting an awful lot of accreditation stuff in those plans because people don't want to get cited. So then we got to make sure we're adding extra statements that accreditation is looking for. And I'll bet you anything, Nick doesn't care one bit about whether EVV is in his plan or not. But yet we're supposed to have to write about EVV. So those are
I,
the kinds of things that I
I
think
don't even give a damn about what EVV is. But yeah,
I just want my services, right? So,
yeah,
yeah, those are things that and I understand why they have to be there. I get all that. But those are the kinds of things that we need to still hold ourselves accountable, our system, accountable to it.
yeah,
We got to listen to people. Self-direction is the way this needs to go. It really does.
yeah, totally. Well, because that's what people without disabilities get. I mean, y'all get self direction all the time. All of
Mhm.
a sudden, you slap a disability on it, and it's like, we got to take away that self direction. It's like,
Well, and
why?
that does, I'm going to challenge that just a little bit because guess what? There are people out there that don't get self direction. Maybe they have a domineering parent, or maybe they have, a
Yeah,
domineering spouse or something. But I'll tell you what, they're not happy.
they're
They're
not.
not happy in that
Yeah,
situation because somebody else is making my decisions.
yeah,
So I get that there are people that need help making decisions. And I really love supported decision making and all of that. I think, but that's in my control to be able to say, I need your help instead of, it's imposed on me. So we've
yeah,
got to help people speak up to be able to say, I need your help. This is what I want your help with. I don't want help over here. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we should leave it alone. Unless it's a health and safety thing, we should leave it alone.
yeah. Well, I had, very domineering parents and family, and it was just, and I tell my story all the time. They know I feel this way, so they're not like, oh, big shock. Um, but yeah, no, like we've talked about early on, nobody likes to be told what to do. And we've gotta, we preach self-direction. I think we've got to push more in that direction.
We do.
Yeah.
Absolutely do. Yep.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun, and this was worth the wait because, as I said,
Oh,
trying to do this a lot
yeah.
ago, get it on the schedule, and I'm so glad that we finally were. And you and I personally will have to steal a credit card and go have lunch.
Oh, that sounds fun.
We
That
need
sounds
to.
fun.
Yeah, especially stealing the credit card. So somebody send me your credit card number.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate your patience in scheduling me in, and I know that we had so much going on. My daughter's wedding being one of them, so yeah, we ended up having to reschedule a couple times, but I appreciate it so much and the opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah, it was awesome. So thank you, Jean, for being here, and stay right there because we'll have a little bit of a conversation off camera just to do some behind the scenes things. But you guys, this is the Nick Speaks podcast where we speak up, speak out, and speak loud about the issues that matter to the disabled the most. I'm your host, Nick Comstock. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you again to our guests. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Nick Speaks podcast, where we speak up, speak out, and speak loud for the disabled community. If today's conversation resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss a new episode. You can find Nick across all platforms by visiting his link tree in the show notes. And please leave a comment to join the conversation. Until next time, keep speaking up, keep speaking out, and keep speaking loud.